audience here in the room, and also welcome to the people who are hopefully watching us online. My name is Magdalena Mirwald. I'm an associate project manager at the Munich Climate Insurance Initiative, which is hosted at United Nations University, and we are co-hosting this capacity building hub day together with ICLEI and UNFCCC, and big thanks to ICLEI and UNFCCC for the great organization. It's today capaCITIES Day, by the way, best name that they have come up with, I have to say, love it. Learning from and transforming our cities. And in this session today, we're going to talk about capaCITIES to bring loss and damage funding to the most vulnerable. We know that in the world, already more than half of the population lives in cities, and over 1.1 billion live in informal urban settlements. And I think we can agree that people living in informal urban settlements really belong to the most vulnerable, where the loss and damage funding should go to. And I have a great panel with me today, who I would like to introduce you to. First of all, we have Ingeniera Hernandez Gomez. She is the Minister of Ecology and Environment of the state of Quintana Roo in Mexico. Welcome. Applause, please. Then we have here to my left, Elisa
Sutanujaya.
I'm very sorry for butchering this, thank you very much. She is the Executive Director of Ruchak Center for Urban Studies. The Ruchak Center is a Think Act tank that works in transforming and transitioning to the ecological age in urban contexts. And you're already doing this since 2010, so a long time working in vulnerable urban communities. Then we have with us Simon Stumpf. Simon, you are desk officer at the German Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, and you are also advisor to the German TC member. You have coordinated the process. I'm sure you had a very busy year, and but very successful ending to that year. Welcome. And then we also have here Annika Schröder. Annika is a policy officer for climate change and development for Miserio e.V. And Miserio is the German Catholic Bishops' Organization for Development Cooperation. So I have a fantastic panel here, but before we turn to our panelists, I would like to start with a short keynote from Elisa, who is going to show us how climate impacts are affecting urban communities in many different contexts. So over to you, and to the tech team, please change to the other presentation, please.
So good afternoon to everyone here. So I come from Jakarta, it's Indonesia, the country is Indonesia. Please visit Indonesia Pavilion because they have a very nice souvenir for you if you attend one of the side events, a promotion. So Indonesia is a country where the population is around 270 million. So as you can see, there's the green one over there, where almost 60% of population live in 98 cities and 69% of housing actually provided by its own people. So in regards about today's event, so I will tell a story from 4 places in Indonesia, from 2 coastal cities of Jakarta and Semarang, small village in central Java, and a tiny island between Sumatra and Singapore. So we all know that we experience the climate crisis impact differently among regions, but in Global South and what Rujak believe, we see climate crisis as great amplifier of urban crisis that are the force faced by vulnerable communities, including urban poor. So Jakarta is the capital, still capital, and the largest city in Indonesia with a population 10.2 million people, where 40% of its population live in informal settlement, or we call it kampung kota. So without climate crisis, Kampung Kota already faced this kind of crisis. We have the challenge of stigmatization, agrarian problem, top-down approach, infrastructure problem. People have to buy water instead of providing by the states, and then bad substandard buildings. This also lead to many forced eviction, for example, in 2015 to 2016. But due to climate crisis, the urban poor now have to face climate-induced eviction to make way for adaptation infrastructure. So in Jakarta, like many other Delta megacities, like in Bangkok and Mumbai, also suffer land subsidence, or you call it sinking. Then we have to deal with the climate crisis, which is also sea level rising at the same time. So this dual crisis in Jakarta is represented in this picture, and I argue this mosque is a poster boy for the sinking Jakarta. So you can find it everywhere and also in here. So any kind of news about sinking Jakarta by international media is represented here with this mosque. So, but let me share you the story. The real reason why this mosque is underwater is not related to sinking at all, but it's because the government decided to not repair the old dike that located in front of the mosque and choose to build another new tall dike at the back of the mosque. So, of course, it become like that. But this mosque also become a poster boy, the reason why we have to move the capital city and why we need to build this $400 billion giant seawall project. And it used to be shaped like a giant bird. So the Ministry of Public Works argued that this could be for fighting the flood, but the latest IPCC report in 2022 about Asia put Great Garuda project as a maladaptive infrastructure, as you can see from the quote over there. But this kind of giant infrastructure and planned only to protect big cities in Indonesia, and despite of it's called maladaptive. But for small island like this, only 1 hour from Jakarta, they have to fight the climate crisis alone by themselves, without necessarily fund or anything that related for them to survive. And it's not only happened in Jakarta, and also in Semarang, the fifth biggest city in Indonesia, also experienced the similar formula. Forced eviction to make way for flood infrastructure, and at the same time, the most vulnerable urban poor also in Semarang coastal line have to deal with their own. They're forced to live 365 days a year in flooded condition and have to build new floor on top of their previous floor every 2 or 3 years. So like that. So it's all year like that. And yet, the infrastructure built by the government along the Semarang-Demak coastal line is just like similar like plan like in Jakarta, and which is not going to protect them at all. And this toll road is built in the promise that they will build a dike after the toll road, but mostly it's not going to help the communities in the previous slide. But in fact, they will create new industrial park at the end of the toll road. And now we go to the village area. So this year we experienced unprecedented heat, and it's not only in cities but also in rural area. But for Java, even though they're facing drought in the past, but this is according to testimonies from local residents that we are currently doing research about loss and damage. They said this year is unprecedented heat even for them. They never experienced a drought like that. And what is the impact for the city's people, for example, because this city is located where they produce chili, and chili is kind of like staple food for Indonesian. So it's of course it's increased the chili price. But at the end of the day, Ministry of Trade said it's not because of climate crisis, it's because of the problem with supply chain. And now we go to another island, tiny island called Rempang Island. An island around 3 months ago, our government, out of the blue, decided to designate the whole island as eco-city and industrial area. And one of investors want to mine sand in order that can be utilized for solar panel production. So out of the blue, indigenous residents, indigenous people who live there, forced to move out to make way of this greenwashing project. So here's the reality from the ground, where within country and even the region, socioeconomic inequality could increase vulnerability risk from the climate hazard, where adaptation and mitigation measure become a nightmare for vulnerable and also indigenous community and of course urban poor. So please use our experience here in Indonesia from the ground as a lesson to design more just and loss and damage mechanism, more just disbursement and implementation practice. For me, it's important to put vulnerable community at the center of the implementation and planning. So from all these things, I also like to seek the discourse from this panel. How come the L&D can also become a catalyst for urban poor to seek justice and also to addressing inequalities and at the same time improving their living condition. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elisa. This was very impressive and shows that it's really important, well, that we're here, but even more so that we actually do some action on the ground to address loss and damage in these communities. So what you were saying, what I understood, is that there are already for a long time underlying vulnerabilities in the communities. Like then there is processes going on like evictions that make life already difficult, which is then exacerbated by climate impacts, including flooding, heat and drought. And now we've seen, you mentioned with the seawall, some of the measures that are financed, maybe also with international climate finance, can be seen as maladaptive and, as you said, not needs-based to the needs of vulnerable communities. So there's definitely room for improvement, and now we got a new fund and we can make it right? So this must be our aspiration, to make it right. You all know that this COP started with a big bang on the first day, something that did never happen before. Big decision on the first day to establish the Loss and Damage Fund and the funding arrangement, which by now has, if I have the latest number, 655 million pledged. Of course, this is just, a drop on the hot stone, as you would say in German, regarding the climate impact, but it's really a great start. So I am very happy with this result. It has also been a long fight for the civil society to get this operationalized. And then we are also hearing that the Santiago Network for Technical Assistance, although the gavel has not gone down again, so we only celebrate later, but it also has a host now, UNDRR and UNOPS, which is good, because we need technical assistance to go to vulnerable communities, and we only can do that when the Santiago network is up and running. So there's definitely a reason to celebrate in the loss and damage in this COP28. But yes, the real work only begins now. Now we have the instruments in the UNFCCC to address loss and damage, but actually the work, how do we allocate the funding? How do we get the technical expertise to the vulnerable communities and the countries? So really the devil lies in the details. Now we have the tools, but how do we address this? And this is what we want to discuss now. And I want to go to you, Engineer Huguet. You are working in the state ministry, but I also know that before you took up this position, you have also worked in municipal governments, regional organizations, also in the private sector, so you have a vast experience. And I would like to know from your experience, what do you think, which activities which could potentially be funded by this Loss and Damage Fund would be most beneficial for the vulnerable communities in Quintana Roo, and especially for urban and informal populations?
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon. Quintana Roo is a destination in the Mexican Caribbean that welcomes over 20 million of tourists annually. They arrive by land, air, sea, to enjoy its beautiful beaches, spanning 500 kilometers of coastline and the rich biodiversity that exists. The Mesoamerican Barrier Reef System, the world's second largest, stand out. Quintana Roo is part of the vast Mayan jungle, the second largest tropical forest corridor after the Amazon. Additionally, it is home to the largest underground river on the planet and a significant system of cenotes. In summary, our economic engine, which is tourism, relies on these ecosystems. However, due to its geographical location, Quintana Roo is highly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. On one hand, hurricanes and beaches erosion pose threats, and on the other hand, the recent massive influx of sargassum, partly to the warmest water, has produced a highly detrimental effects on the state. Thank you.
So you just showed that Quintana Roo is very vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. Yeah, also Quintana Roo, what do you think, which activities, if you could choose, you got money from the Loss and Damage Fund to assist these losses and damages, these climate impacts in your region, what do you think would be the best to do to help climate vulnerable communities in Quintana Roo? So communities that are already addressed, what do you think should we do to support them?
Yeah, We work with the communities because the damage is in the communities because they work in the forest. For example, is a second forest in the world after the Amazons, and we work in the climate bonos de carbono with them because we have to make a conservation for the natural, for the environment, and then we work with them in the change climate, in everything, and we have programs with them, work with them about the conservancy, about the combat with the change climate.
Thank you very much. Annika, I'm going to move to you. I'm going to ask you a question. You have been working in Miserio for many years, focusing on climate negotiations. You have been with the communities, working with the local organizations for many years, which Miserio is doing, very long-standing partnerships. And you have also been advocating for a human rights-based approach in the UNFCCC for many years. And I would like to know from you that which principles and which rules of procedure are important when we go now to actually address loss and damage for the most vulnerable when we use the loss and damage funding.
Yes, thank you very much for the invitation. I think you pose really important questions, and one could answer this with the typical, of course we need funding now, we need eligibility and so on, and participatory approaches and so on. But if we really, really want to act and support informal settlements dealing with loss and damage, I think the first and foremost is to really get what the story is about. And to be honest, I'm getting goose skin when I hear people talking about vulnerabilities that are being posed by the informality. In fact, these are human rights violations, and human rights that are not taken into account on the local level. Meaning, so if you are an informal settler, it might be that your right to the city is being denied. So you are not allowed to stay where you are, because you live in a risky area, which of course needs to be addressed. But with this argument of you live in a risky area, your right to stay there is being denied. Meaning, in the end, you don't get access to good water, you don't get access to sanitation, you do not get access to school, and you're not allowed to vote in local elections. So you are excluded and being pushed back in your marginalized communities, where still the community could flourish, yeah? People help each other, have their social nets, they help each other in case of illnesses, they support each other. But in case of an emergency, in case of a natural disaster, those social networks fail because everyone, each and everyone, different from somebody being ill, is impacted. And then most of these communities after a disaster stay on their own without support from the outside. And if we are looking at climate politics and how they are being designed right now, like in Jakarta we have seen some examples, but we can observe them through the lens of our partners, what they experience in so many cities around the world. Green transport is being installed by relocating people without any support, or they are just relocated to areas far, far, far away from the city, where the ticket to get to the market where they could find work costs more than what they could earn on that day. So they are even more marginalized after relocation in the name of climate protection. We see it even when it comes to adaptation. We see that industrialized areas are being protected by dams, but for the construction of a dam, they relocated people, sometimes even violently. So having this in mind, it's extremely important that the loss and damage approaches that we are developing right now, for really good reasons, learn from these experiences. And this is why we have advocated for a human rights-based approach. Unfortunately, we needed to learn that, like everywhere in those negotiations, parties are not ready to include human rights obligation into their mechanisms for solutions, although human rights are having a strong reference in the preamble of the Paris Agreement, meaning they count for each and every of the bodies implemented under the roof of the Paris Agreement. One could say, so there is no need to re-implement them in the text. But I tell you, if you don't reaffirm those human rights, they will not be taken into account when designing the mechanisms. As long as we don't have it now, we need to look forward. We all know loss and damage will be dealt with locally and nationally. And there might be a small window for direct access for NGOs working with those communities. But those are the smaller programs. And I think the big danger lying in the huge programs. So it is extremely important not only to talk about the direct access for communities, but also about how to ensure that a meaningful observation of what's really happening, of meaningful monitoring of the certain vulnerabilities and a rights-based approach is being taken before designing any idea of implementation. And when having the idea of doing something, then really run to the community that you need to deal with. And then start from the scratch by asking, what's wrong here? What do you need? What insults do you observe? And then start to develop the program.
Thank you so much, Annika. And I love that you also called me out on the vulnerabilities. When you work in this, sometimes it's easy, right? You drift off into jargon, and then it's easy to forget what this actually means to people, right? An underlying vulnerability is having no right to housing, having no access to clean water. So it's always good to, every day when we work in loss and damage, remember why we actually do this, because the climate crisis and the climate impacts are real. And also love that you said we have to learn from our experiences. Addressing loss and damage is not going to happen in a vacuum. We have the development work has been going on for many decades, adaptation now already 20 years, and there is lots of experience, some good, some bad. If you ask local communities on the ground, sometimes it's more often bad than good. And we have to reflect on this in order to, when we address loss and damage, as you and Elisa also said, not to exacerbate, for example, with forced relocation, and then thinking that we do it right, but actually worsen the life of vulnerable communities. Simon, you have been coordinating the German TC process. As I said, I'm not jealous of your job, but now you have successfully, the fund is launched. You've heard now lots of concerns, right? Human rights-based approach, needs-based approach, yes, small grant window, let's see, the World Bank has to come up with a way to do that, but the focus seems to be on national programs, but how do we make sure that these national programs also are needs-based to the local communities? So all of these concerns, how have these been reflected in the negotiations of the Transitional Committee over the last year? Over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, and good afternoon to everybody. Thanks for inviting me to this very interesting panel discussion. Responding to your question, I would say the greatest misperception I had coming to Dubai was that we would have a successful opening ceremony and then we just enjoy the rest of the time here at the climate conference. That is so not true. We have no time to lose and we need to get things done now. We need to operationalize the fund, which for now, you have to have that in mind, is a piece of paper. We adopted a piece of paper for the funding arrangements and for the fund, and also which is something we had a significant amount of pledges. So everything is on the table to start. So we need to build up the structures of the new fund. We need to create a board. We need to define the policies and so on and so on. Because the pictures we've seen from Indonesia, also what we heard from Mexico, this is what it is about. And our work is only coming to a successful impact if those communities can benefit from the structure we have on paper today. So vulnerability, I can tell you a bit from the inside of the negotiations, has been one of the key issues in the TC process on two different levels. So one level is that we very much wanted to have a focus on the most vulnerable countries, because for the fund, which is not a silver bullet, I'll come to that later, it is important that the resources which are there need to focus on those who are most in need. So this is one thing, and we found a quite good compromise in the decision text and in the governing instrument. And the other thing, this is what you were all talking about, is how to make the funds, the money, accessible for the communities in need. So the first thing I would like to respond is that is a non-negotiable condition for the World Bank. The World Bank has to confirm before the whole process starts that communities and subnational levels can access also fundings from that fund. So this is one thing we made sure, and there will not be a fund with no access for communities. This is in the text, which is available for everybody. Also, in the governing instrument, we made clear that it's not only about accessing the funds, it's also, you also touched upon this, it's also about participation. So it needs to be ensured that people affected from losses and damages, the vulnerables, the communities, can participate not only in parts, but in the whole project cycle, in the whole funding cycle, from the beginning to the monitoring and to the end. So this is what we have in the paper. You need to bear with us a little bit more, because this now needs to be translated into action. So I can assure you that my days are still very full, trying to get to the next steps and convene a board meeting as soon as possible. Also, the human rights approach, that was something of our top priorities. It's an international negotiation process. There are different countries around the table, and at the end you get to compromises, and the challenge is to move the bar a little bit higher than you had it before. So we were very much engaging on a human rights-based and a feminist approach, but we still can do more. And this is the work which is ahead of us. We need to translate this decision text into action. We need to define policies. We need to define how allocation schemes will be done. We need to define allocation criteria and all the access modalities and a lot more. So, so this is basically the work which is ahead of us, and also part of it, what was important was to put the country planning in the center of the work of the fund, to have programmatic approaches, to strengthen national response plans, and put the need and priorities in the center for the funding, which is about to come. So this is where we are, and we will certainly. I also wanted to tell you that these examples we've just seen here, they were guiding us throughout the whole processes. We had several workshops, and we were also having a lot of case studies from different regions in the world to see what climate change actually does to people and why we are all here. And finding an agreement with all the regional representatives of the world, from the north and from the global south. We needed one meeting more, but at the end we found an agreement, so now let's get to work.
And thank you very much, Simon. Thanks again for the hard work, and yeah, as you said, I'm sure you're still gonna be busy. Maybe I wish you have a small break, at least on the free day on the 7th. Yes, and I mean the work definitely not going to stop. Elisa, you showed us the pictures to remind us the climate impacts in urban contexts. So if you could tell us, how could this Loss and Damage Fund best support the informal urban settlements in Jakarta or broader in Indonesia? Since you've been working with the urban communities for such a long time, now that this international funding is in some time going to be made available, we hope very soon, what would be your vision that this reaches the ground?
Yeah, first, before we go into the vision, I also agree with what Annika said. It is important to put human rights in the center of the implementation as well. because based from the experience, usually if the funding coming only through government and without necessarily regards on human rights, usually the government only want to work on what they call as a clean and clear land situation, while the one in the informal settlement, usually I think like 90% of it could have a problem in terms of agrarian problem. So one thing that's kind of like a precondition, then that's mean that you have to, how can I say, you have to acknowledge and also human rights on that side in the implementation. And one thing that several things that when I read what is the definition about loss and damage, for me is important is could help the urban poor to improve their housing condition. It means that right now usually they live in the cramped area. I'm not sure whether it's possible or not because of about the urban heat is something that you cannot. It's irreversible, right? The urban heat and all those things. We can only reduce it bit by design, but not necessarily like the whole thing. So what we currently doing today, for example, we helping and also getting a grant and then making a revolving fund to allow urban poor to retrofit their housing using a passive design. But that's something really provide impact by the time the project finalized, and it's really thing that really dear to them because it's their houses where they doing their economic activity as well, not only a place to sleep and also place for children to study, for example. As you can see from case of Semarang, one thing that they really need actually sometimes the improvement of the whole neighborhood. Is it and also a decision whether they can stay or they have to leave. But that's something, a decision that have to come from the communities, not coming from the government. So I hope the mechanism in the loss and damage, I'm quite happy when Simon said that that the community can access, there's a possibility that the community can access the fund. It means that they can also have a decision whether they want to stay or they have to leave. So the decision is coming from them. So I have that those two are something that I really looked forward to.
Thank you so much, Elisa. So you're saying improving the housing, because this is really the heart. I mean, your home is your home, right, in the end. And that also on the ground, in the local communities, there is a nexus. So like losses and damages from climate change, addressing them, adaptation, development, they are all linked, right? It's on the ground, sometimes now we have loss and damage funding, but I think on the ground it's going to be mixed. And we have to also leave it to the communities to say what they specifically want to do with the funding. Simon was saying, yes, there is not going to be a fund without community or regional entity access. Do you have experience trying to access climate finance from where you have been working? And if yes, what were the challenges to try to overcome these challenges in the loss and damage fund?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, in Quintana Roo, we have a parametric insurance to protect beaches and coral reefs against Category 4 and 5 hurricanes, and which was recognized by the Natural Conservancy at the previous COP15 on biodiversity in Montreal for its contribution for the world in acquiring the first parametric insurance for reefs and beaches. This innovative tool demonstrates how nature can be preserved through the use of financial instruments. It's very, very, very good. And we want to make for the mangroves, for the selvas, for the bosques, and it's very important. This year, nearly $600,000 were located to the 4 coral rescue projects and the assessment of the current condition of reef in these areas through community brigades. The issue of sargassum in previous years has affected not only the tourist economic and beachgoers, but also marine fauna, flora, and the reef in 2022, over 54,000 7,000 tons were collected in this year. Therefore, collaboration took place with the academic and business sector, the federal government, municipalities, and German cooperation, HEISETA, in the comprehensive strategy for the management and use of sargassum in Quintana Roo. Based on 7 guiding principles: health, knowledge management, sargassum research and monitoring, legal framework, comprehensive sargassum management, sargassum utilization, economic instrument, and 2 cross-cutting axes: communication and international cooperation. The objective of this strategy is to mitigate the environmental, social, and economical impact caused by the massive arrival of sargassum in our state, in a coordinated, scheduled, and measurable manner, reduce cost and effort in its management, and increase in investment opportunities, turning a problem into the business opportunity with a focus on the circular economy. Additionally, I would like to mention that Quintana Roo has its climate change law and a special program of action against climate change. There is also a financial mechanism on environment sanation right, a charge to hospitality service users in Quintana Roo aimed at mitigating the environment damage caused by tourist-related activities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So you mentioned the parametric insurance as one tool that Quintana Roo is profiting. It is one of the many different tools that could be financed by the Loss and Damage Fund. The scope of the Loss and Damage Fund is very broad. So it's I think important for the local context to pick the instrument that works the best. And also thank you for telling your experience with the sargassum. It also shows that the response to loss and damage really needs to look at the local problems, right? Because the sargassum is a localized issue in Quintana Roo, and so we need to make sure to really adjust approaches to the circumstances. Thank you. So Simon, now you've been listening to what do we need to do. So how would you, from your negotiation experience, envision to reach the most vulnerable people like informal urban settlers with new and also existing instruments to responding to loss and damage?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think you partially already said it, new and existing instruments. So the main purpose we were engaging in the TC was to make funding, in general, funding accessible to the most vulnerable communities. And a single fund cannot be the silver bullet. So of course we need to scale up, and I know that the needs are much higher, and we need to mobilize other sources. We also need to explore innovative sources, but all this will not be enough. So we have, apart from having no time to lose, we also need all hands on deck. So we also have a decision to establish new funding arrangements, and there's already a lot of going on where support is delivered for vulnerable communities and for people in need. So ideally, those funding arrangements, they should be guided by comprehensive risk management approaches. We need strong adaptation, we need disaster prevention. So we need all this together to develop instruments which are effective and which deliver an effective support for transformative recovery after shocks. So one of the instruments Germany has been engaged since the climate conference last year in Sharm el-Sheikh is the Global Shield against climate risks. So this instrument there, we already proved that there are instruments who can help people and can play an important role responding to loss and damage. The Global Shield works through country protection packages and works on a demand-driven approach. So it's about to find the most cost-effective solutions, and let's use also what we have already available and scale this up too. And that's also part of the decision we have taken in the transitional committee. It's not an either or. We need both. We need everything we have available. We also need the multilateral development banks. We need the United Nations. We need a lot more. And we need the Santiago Network, which was also mentioned, which is an important instrument for coordinating and also scaling up and maximizing technical support. So technical and financial support needs to go together. If we want to fight against loss and damage, this is one thing which is clear. And I can also reconfirm here that Germany stands to its commitment to support the Santiago Network with 10 million euros, as it has been announced in 2021 in Glasgow. So, and also hearing from the negotiation rooms that there's progress on the Santiago Network. We're hopefully able to find a host. Let's see what the result of the COP brings. And then we have another successful outcome which complements to what we heard at the opening ceremony. And last but not least, this is basically what we are doing here is building some sort of a financial architecture. It's not only just a new fund, it's mobilizing everything, all the instruments available, including creating new ones, to target communities and people in need. So this also goes along with a massive coordination challenge. So we also agreed to have a high-level coordination council, which will be part of the architecture which has been decided at the opening ceremony, where we also make sure that there's participation of civil societies, of people affected, indigenous communities, local representatives, and so on and so on. All this also needs to be translated into much more concrete proposals, but this is the structure we have on the table also here. So there's a number of tools we have, and this is the other thing we need to work on. So if I may repeat, it's about getting things done, but also taking everything we have into account.
Thank you very much. So yes, lots to do. We have the fund with the community access, with the national level access. We have the funding arrangements which are already existing. There we need to scale up the action towards the informal urban settlers or vulnerable people, and then we have to identify the gaps in the funding arrangements and also strategically fill them maybe with something else that is also outside the fund, right? Because it says new, existing and new funding arrangements. So basically 3, funding arrangements and what's yet to come. Thank you, and lots of work. Annika, you already talked about the human rights approach, but I'm sure that you have more expectations of the fund and the funding arrangement when it comes to serving climate vulnerable people and informal communities. So what are your expectations to give to Simon and to us?
Yes, we just published together with the with the United Nations University and the Munich Climate Change Insurance Initiative, we just published a position paper on how to address loss and damage in informal settlements. And I'm going, if you like to, you can grab a card, and via the QR code you will get to the recommendations. And this position paper basically aimed at filling in the gap about to build up awareness around informal settlers and their specific vulnerabilities, rights situation and needs. And although we are only at the start, we at least draw some basic recommendations which have been already touched here, and like the ambition itself, there must be sufficient funding. If there isn't sufficient funding, nothing will happen in the end. I think that's a really high and important precondition. Second, we touched on this, the marginalized communities that need to be supported, the representation in the governing structures. Of course, we need direct access for communities being able to do small things with big effects. And also I would add on this, to experiment. Sometimes things could go wrong. And this could also be a success, because from those we learn. So I want to warn to have too many indicators and those stuff. So sometimes things just need to happen to be effective in the end. We have the inclusiveness of national mechanisms. Yeah? So nationally, it's national projects that are going to be taken, national frameworks for the implementation of loss and damage and disaster responses. So there need to be participation on those levels as well. And I think the last point will be the most difficult is the transformative approach, which means nothing less than after the disaster is before the next disaster. So when we have funds to rebuild, when we have funds to support social networks in the communities, how to use them that they also prepare not only for the next disaster, but also for the slow onset changes that will occur with every ton of carbon and any gallon of gas that we are still emitting into the atmosphere. So, and I think it's really important to keep in mind not only to react on what is known today, but really to foresee what's going to happen in the future. We as Miseria, we see a huge lag with our partners. They do great stuff to respond to disasters. They start to do great stuff to respond to slow onset, like salinization of water, and salinizations in the field, for example. But what about the long-term losses? What if we get to 3-degree warmer world? What if only Philippines alone will have to relocate 20 million? I'm not saying 20,000, you hear me right. Only 20 million in one country if we get towards 3 degrees, because they're living at the surface of the ocean, which will then flood their houses. And that's just one country, one locality. With 4 degrees, we will have those numbers only in one city. Imagine what a task for those communities. So it's nothing about doing a project here and there. It's really about implementing a long-term strategy to deal with these losses. Let me add one more point, if I like to. So this work that we are doing together is not only to put what we know together, because there is a knowledge gap around this. So we want to do a report which really puts together what is known, enriched with interviews with people on the ground, with people working with those people, but also with scientists. And from this on, developing participatory frameworks where communities or civil society organizations working with those communities could go to the community to ask what are the real losses, be it economically, be it non-economically, like health issues. So what is really known to enrich the studies that are already in place, and then these data are not only to present what's going on, but they should be the first step to go into action. What do I mean by action? Action starts with dialogue, and in this case we want to bring together in those cases that we are looking at in 3 different cities around the globe. Those partnering organizations are going to approach their local authorities, presenting the results and starting a process, hopefully, of dealing with those on the local basis, while at the same time bringing this knowledge to the international stage to see how could international cooperation, how can the Loss and Damage Fund and all the other funding instruments support in those arenas. So it's really a starting point of knowing more and talking more about it, but really with the vision to make action happen.
Thank you, Annika. You all get the QR code. You can read our policy recommendations there. Just to reflect a bit on what you've said, I think, again, thank you for reminding us of worst case scenario, which is unfortunately where we are kind of heading, right? Unless we mitigate much more, 2 degrees is easy in to reach, and I don't even dare to think past 2100, right? It seems long in the future, but 80 years is not so much. If we have to relocate 20 million people in one country, we need the transformative approach. At the same time, how do we make sure that we safeguard people's human rights, people's rights, when we do these massive changes in their lives, there's going to be trades-off and difficult decisions to make. And also we need much more funding, and we somehow need to mobilize, as you said, Simon, innovative sources of finance to, fund all of these activities. And as you said, not just a project here or there, but it needs to be really programmatic from the country level, which also needs to be coordinated very well. So many problems ahead, but we should be optimistic. We got the funding arrangement. We now just need to go to work. We have a few minutes. I think I could take one or two questions. There is a question I see in the front. I will give you the microphone. All right, here you go.
Thank you. My question, I believe, if I can put two quick questions before that. I'm Stella Paul. I'm a journalist from Interpress Service. It's a newswire. So my first question to Simon is, it seems like we are looking at a very perfect mechanism, finance mechanism, finally here, the very rosy picture. What if it goes the way that Green Climate Fund is going, where $1 million trickling in from here, the $1 million trickling in from there, and we don't have that much time to take action? That's my question. The second one, I was really hoping that one of the panelists would touch upon this, but I haven't heard about it so far. So, we know there is also a massive lack of capacity at the community level. And now, while we are being very happy that communities could access this fund directly, what about this capacity? And who's going to, fill in the gap? Thank you.
I think with this, we're already, because we only have a few minutes. All right. Thank you so much for the questions. You actually with the capacities took my last question, which would have been that, but thank you very much. It's a great bridge. So first of all, question to you, Simon. What if it goes like the GCF, million here, million there?
Well, we know that the scale to address loss and damage and to respond to loss and damage is very high, what we need. Mentioning the Green Climate Fund, I think this is another successful outcome of this COP, that we also have seen significant pledges to the Green Climate Fund, summing up to $12.8 billion for the replenishment of the Green Climate Fund, which happened at the beginning of October. In Germany, Bonn was hosting the pledging conference. So I wouldn't say money is trickling here and there. I would say we have a strong instrument when it comes to the Green Climate Fund, which, by the way, its mandate is about mitigation and adaptation. And now we are building another instrument and another architecture responding to losses and damages. And in this new fund, we also have a replenishment cycle, which is part of the construction. And every 4 years, there will be a replenishment. That doesn't mean it's in 4 years. We need to define that when we set up the structures. But there will be a regular replenishment also for the new fund responding to loss and damage. Thank you.
Thank you. And now going to your very important capacities question, right? So this is going to be my closing question to each of the panelists. The fund is going to be set up. There is going to be community direct access. There's going to be the national level mechanisms. But as you said, what capacities, I love it too much, on the ground do we need to actually access this funding? So between 1 and 3 capacities that you think we need to work on to build in the communities, or also maybe in the national or international level to actually make this work. Elisa, I'm going to start with you.
Okay. Usually within the community, they already have a capacity by their own, but all we can do is strengthening them. That's why we are our organization working with communities, and there's not only strengthening themselves, but they also strengthening us in order to understand what is their value, what is deemed important for them. So in my opinion, instead of trying to how to increase their capacity, but it's also important try to find a match between the communities and other organizations who can work together. And because you cannot really accept that one community suddenly become like a superhero or something, that's impossible. So finding a way to collaborate among sectors, among different expertise, I think is more strategic rather than trying to make them something else that they're not. So that's my answer.
Great, thank you very much. Ingeniera, do you have a main capacity that you wish that everybody who is in the room, works on in order to increase the access to loss and damage funding? What do you think people need to learn in order to access this money?
¿Me traduce en español el último?
La gente que tiene que aprender para que pueda acceder a ese dinero de las pérdidas y daños, la gente local.
Ya, ¿puedes explicarlo en español? ¿Es mejor y lo traduce?
Sí.
Sí. Sorry. Sí, gracias. Sí, es un instrumento financiero increíble. La verdad es que fuimos los primeros en tenerlo y de hecho muchos de los países como Brasil se acercaron a nosotros para poder, para que les expliquemos qué fue lo que pasó, cómo se implementó. Empezamos y definitivamente se empezó a trabajar sobre todo en qué era lo que queríamos proteger y cómo lo podríamos proteger. Definitivamente todo tiene que ver con el dinero, con el financiamiento que pudiéramos tener, porque a veces los gobiernos no tenemos la capacidad de financiamiento. Entonces, bueno, se empezó a hacer ese tema de cómo podemos hacerlo a través de un banco, a través de qué es lo que queremos primero proteger. Empezamos con solamente la zona norte de Quintana Roo, empezamos solamente con lo que era Cancún hasta Solidaridad, que es Playa del Carmen. Sin embargo, después vimos la necesidad, y eso fue antes de que ocurriera el impacto de los huracanes 5 y 6 que tuvimos, se hizo en toda la costa de Quintana Roo, que son los 500 kilómetros. Pero empezamos a trabajar en ese proyecto financiero de cómo podemos hacerlo y bueno, finalmente las comunidades, bueno, tenemos comunidades que viven del arrecife, que viven sobre todo el tema que tenemos ahora también de lo que es el blanqueamiento. Entonces, estas comunidades se acercaron con nosotros y se hicieron grupos de brigadistas que empezaron a trabajar para fortalecer, para cuidarlo. Y así fue como empezamos a trabajar. A la fecha trabajamos con 3 empresas, asociaciones que empezaron a hacer la rehabilitación y en segundo plano, estas comunidades de brigadistas son los que están viendo y protegiendo los manglares, ¿no? Entonces, pero todo es resultado de este proyecto financiero de lo del arrecife.
Sí, muchísimas gracias.
Gracias.
I'm sorry, I will do a brief summary of the intervention. Basically, this experience started, of course, thanks to the finance, and they have been leading this effort, which countries like Brazil were following and learning from them. And then after having this interest in working in a part of the coast, especially in Cancun and in Quintana Roo, I understood that they had to work in the whole coastline. And through that, they have been working with different communities to help them solve the mangroves and also, of course, to scale up this intervention. So they are still in the process, but definitely finance has been the first step to take action. So thank you.
Just to quickly add to the summary, so what I also understood is first is to need to find out what do we want to protect, right? So it's the what, technical assistance to find out what is my biggest need. And then once I have the gap, who can best support me? Who can best finance this, los bancos? And then also for this natural protection project, there was community groups that came together and then implemented this project. And the community groups, they also need to be capacitated. That's what I understood. Thank you very much. So, what?
A Natural Conservancy.
Yes.
But they acompañó con nosotros.
Yes.
Efectivamente.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Great. So, who, what, and with the communities. Yeah. Great. Annika, I give you the closing. Basically, what is the capacities that we need to build in order to make this fund work for the most vulnerable?
I think first and foremost it is building understanding about the issues and the needs. I think that's the first and foremost thing before we could do anything, and we are not yet there. And second, I would love to build up the capacities of those in power to listen to those impacted. So really building up networks where local authorities are listening to the communities impacted and those who will be impacted, because we don't have them in mind yet. In every policy we do, we talk a lot about responding to disasters, but we don't talk about what is up to come in the future. And I really, really strongly think, still, I haven't seen a sign from this COP yet that I should think about it differently, but I still strongly believe while fighting for 1.5 degree limit, we need to prepare towards 3 degrees. So this is really an issue now, and so the capacity of local authority is a really, really important thing to deal with. And this won't come without money, because in many cases there are just not enough technical support members in the local authority to deal with all of those consequences. It is not by bad behavior that they don't care about people. It's about the capacities that are just so limited. So that's my message alongside, just to reaffirm what Elisa said. The capacity is there with the people. And I don't need that each and every community member does talk our slang of vulnerabilities. It's okay when they don't decide and don't divide between earthquakes and climate disasters. For them, it's all the same. It's impacting them. It doesn't mind. For them, it's not important if it's a climate disaster or another one. And for them, it's not important if we call it vulnerability or capability or whatever. I think the capacities are there, and if there are people who really, really are able to listen and to understand and then translate it into language that is approachable to the funds as well. And from my learning with other partners to access adaptation funding or RED funding or be it mitigation funding, it is a long process until an NGO really can break it down into a language that is being understood by the different actors in the funds. And it normally takes 3 months to really translate an already good project proposal into one that fits the finance architecture. And I'm only talking about small funds, not about the green fund. I mean, this is nearly impossible. I think only 2 successfully tried so far. Leave the communities where they are. Don't make them too overloaded with information. Be careful what you tell them, because it is a really, really harsh scenario that you have to present to the communities. And I think it's really important to be, it's difficult to deal with all the uncertainties also in those models. But I think, just a few points when thinking out loud.
Thank you very much. Well, how could we close better than with the takeaways from our fantastic panelists? Thank you very much for being here. Simon had to leave to another meeting. Big round of applause. And thank you very much for the audience to being with us and for the people online. And I hope to see you around here at COP. Thank you very much.